Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So this is a really cool episode. Obviously, we're delving in a little bit about the whole Anton and Coulson situation. Because at first I was thinking like, okay, Anton has like a little bit of a personal connection with Coulson. We kind of learn about this in this episode because basically his unit ended up getting killed because of the mission that Coulson and May were on. They were retrieving an object or something to basically Anton and his people were sent to retrieve it too, and they ended up dying because they failed to retrieve that object. So it's kind of like, oh, that basically Anton looked into it and found out the person behind all this was Coulson, and that he's neck deep into all this, that he's got all these different people protecting him. It's like, dude, if you would like legitimately, you can't blame Coulson. He's literally like, especially at this point in time, he was just kind of like a lower level agent, you know. This is actually, because that was what I really appreciate about it, is because we saw him and May in their earlier days. It's the same situation as when you got to see May outside of, like, before she became known as a Calvary, and like you seeing her, she's got like a fun personality, she's smiling all the time. It's weird seeing May like that, but it's like you do realize just how much of an impact the whole situation that basically made her known as a Calvary, how much of an impact that had on her life. Obviously had a big impact on relationships too. Because basically they just had this little back and forth, and the fact of the matter is, he's like, yo, why are you here? Like, May, get away, you're gonna mess up my groove. She's like, groove? Like, you won't got any groove, you're still green at this. Even making fun of him, because apparently there was a mission they were on, they were supposed to pretend to be husband and wife, and he was fumbling with his hands and everything, and he couldn't get the bra off, or at least it took him like 2 minutes just to do that. And it's just having this back and forth relationship, which is like, it's obviously, it's already there, but it's a lot more professional now. You see, it's like they had fun with it, and I appreciated that. Kind of getting to see them. Obviously, because we've seen, top agent, Melinda May and Phil Coulson, but this is them kind of like in their earlier years. So they're kind of, I mean, granted, I see earlier years. We don't really know how long ago it was, because they go to the point of being like, oh, some time ago. See, now that I guess you could. I'm not about to get into it. It's not worth it. But I still appreciate kind of seeing like this is before everything really happened. But the point I'm getting across is like, Anton can't blame them for that. They were just doing their job. Besides, it's like, really, if you want to think about it, the one at the center of all is really Fury, because it's not like Coulson was in charge. Because in his mind, Anton's got this whole conspiracy theory like, oh, the fact of the matter is that Coulson's got all these people fighting for him. He's got all these people to be his shield. Fury, Tony, even Mace, for example. It's like, he's got S.H.I.E.L.D's backing to protect him, so he can go through with his agenda, with aliens and stuff like that. It's like, wait, what? What are you talking about? If you had dived any deeper, you realize a lot of stuff happens. Like, yes, Coulson's involved with certain things, but like going back to it, that was all Fury's idea. So it's like, why aren't you pissing him? It's like, oh, I guess because it comes back to a situation where it was like a more personal thing, which I was thinking like, oh, Coulson killed his dad or something like that. It's like, no, his men in his unit die. Not even by Coulson's hand. It's not even by May's hand, by his own people for failing to do their job. It's like, Coulson was just there doing his job too. I mean, granted, it doesn't justify what happened, but I mean, you get where he's coming from, but at the same time, it's like, even Coulson like joked about it. It's like, well, kind of made light of the situation. It's like, dude, I don't even know who you are. You literally spent all this time seeking revenge, diving deep into my life, trying to get to know me like, oh, I'm your true enemy about everything. It's like, dude, I don't know you. I don't even remember the object we were sent to retrieve, which I thought at the time, I was like, oh, maybe he's lying about that. Maybe we'll find out at the end of the episode. We don't. I guess at the end of it, it doesn't really matter what it was. Like, because he acts like Coulson's the one who was behind this. I mean, truth be told, you want to blame anyone, blame Loki. He's the one that kind of brought all this about. I mean, Coulson died and got brought back to life. That wasn't even his fault. That was just kind of like, that was kind of against his will. He didn't want to be brought back. Fury kind of forced that upon him, and then everyone kept the secret from him. So I was like, yeah. I mean, yes, I'll admit, there's certain things, yes, you can blame Coulson for. The whole Hive situation, you could arguably blame him for that, because it's like Hive now had a body to come back through, but at the same time, it's still like, it's just the way the world works. The world is a very always revolving thing, and things are always happening. It's not Coulson's fault the way the world is. Like, I mean, from an outside perspective, it's like, Coulson's a small part of the Marvel universe. Gods existed before Phil got involved. So there was, obviously, Iron Man was a thing before, Phil got involved. Obviously, he played his part in bringing them together as the Avengers and everything. But even then, it's like, But I see where you could like get that misconception, like, oh, Phil is the reason for everything that basically happened in the Marvel universe, because a lot of stuff has been in the workings and in the background from long before Phil existed, before he was born. So it's like you can't blame him for everything, but it's a situation where Anton needed to latch on. I could say it didn't seem like the personal thing I thought it was supposed to be. But as a soldier and everything, your men become like brothers to you, so they're kind of like a family to him, so it makes sense. But I thought it'd be like a little bit more personal, like, oh, like I said, he killed his dad, or his dad got killed because of something Coulson and them did. It's like, no, it wasn't even something like that. I was kind of hoping there was going to be a little showdown between him and Anton, but it's like, no, it didn't happen. It did happen between him and Daisy, though. Daisy's just like knocking him backward for powers, and then he ends up, like one of the knives end up in her shoulder, and so she pulls out the knife and starts fighting him a little bit, like showing him, like, yo, she don't just need her powers. Daisy is well trained. She can kick your ass even with other powers, which she did pretty well. But then he's like, well, the fact of the matter is you cheat, and she's like, no, I'm not cheating, and she's fighting him normally, and then the final blow she hits him with her powers. It's kind of like doing a combo, and it's like, no, she's not cheating. She's using the assets that have been given to her. Like, her powers are a part of her now. They're an extension of her, so that's not cheating. You're kind of stuck in your old way of thinking, like, oh, this is the way the world is. It's the way the world's supposed to be. So it's like, that's the reason why you're going to lose, because the world is always evolving. Because I was starting to think, I was like, is there going to be something special about Anton? Because when Mace punched him, like, nothing happened. But then again, it was kind of, well, it's because Mace isn't well trained, and probably at that point, him punching it was like, oh, the power disappeared from his veins. So I did appreciate the fact is what he was trying to do. He's trying to make Mace be like, oh, make you see the error of your ways. Don't believe in S.H.I.E.L.D. and everything. Which Mace was like, no, you idiot. I'm a believe in Coulson. I believe in S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, he stands behind them. It's like, because how can you work for a place that wants to parade you around as one of the monsters? It's like, oh, S.H.I.E.L.D. is only out to protect monsters, not people. It's like, I mean, when you look at him, Anton's going off and done other things of just hurt and killing innocent people. So I kind of skipped over it because it was kind of something that was added at the end of the episode, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's the whole May and Coulson thing. Obviously, like, oh, is there something between them or not? Basically, May is like, all right, if things don't work out between me and this civilian, because she's like, she doesn't like dating civilians. It's her whole point of like, you can't tell them exactly what's going on. But essentially, they were talking about, oh, if things don't work out between them, it's like, oh, maybe there could be something between us. We'll kind of share it over a drink. Hence the drinking thing, before May got taken. Well, around the time May got taken and stuff. It's like, that makes sense now, because it was kind of their promise. It's like, things between her and Andrew didn't work out. I mean, still, she didn't really go down that route. More so than anything, I think it's also because she was dealing with that whole Calvary situation. So that's one reason why she didn't take that. But I think it's also because, she's still in love with Andrew, but now Andrew's gone and everything. So I guess maybe that's her finally being willing to move on. Because I mean, that's a big part of this too. Like, everyone moving on, not just her. Coulson moving on, Daisy moving on. I did forget that he was dating Rosalind at the time last season too. I mean, obviously, a lot of stuff coincided. So I almost completely forgot about it. I mean, I don't know why I forgot about it, because that's literally the reason why Coulson went out of his way to kill Ward. But nevertheless, that was just kind of interesting to me. Like I said, I always like things when you just add a little context. I'm like, oh, that's kind of where that started. Even if it's like, oh, that happened, like, oh, of course they could add that because they're adding that later on. But like I said, it still adds context to things, and I appreciate that. What I loved is finding out that, Radcliffe has basically spent his entire time in the framework, most likely spending the time with, I forgot her real name now, the lady that Ida's basically based around. And the fact is that he's kind of, not wanting to be disturbed. He's like, okay, I've laid out all the plans, all the work for you, Anton. Just go talk to Ida and I can get this done. And he's like, no, I don't want to trust that thing, which is like, I guess, because to him, it's like, obviously he has a big problem with Inhumans because they're unnatural and stuff like that, which is like, I still don't know, like, I don't know. Like, I don't 100% see his mentality about the Inhuman situation, but I guess it's just one of those situations, oh, they're unnatural and stuff like that, blah, blah, blah. They're not meant to exist on this world type of situation, but whatever. But then he's just down on Ida, just like, oh, I don't want to talk that thing. I don't want to, like, I'll talk to you, but I won't talk to this thing, Which so I'm like, okay, so you have a problem with Android too? I was like, is the object, that thing that happened between you and Coulson, connected to an Android? It's like, I mean, to our knowledge, we don't know. Like I said, I don't know if Coulson actually even saw what it was they were supposed to get. The only person that saw it was May. So I mean, like I say, it seems like that was just supposed to be just a point in the story. It's not important what it was. I mean, who knows? Maybe later on it might prove to be important. Maybe it already has proved to be important because it already played a role, and we just don't know at what point it was. I mean, maybe they've referenced it earlier in the series, and you're supposed to tie it back. It's like, oh, something in Russia. It's like, oh, they mentioned some kind of object or something from Russia earlier in the series that we just couldn't correlate. Now we kind of see where it's coming from and what kind of branched out because of it. But the fact is, like I said, just having such a problem with an android. So to me, it just comes down to like he doesn't like anything that's not 100% human. So literal, like definition of racism, like racism at its purest form, I guess you could call it. But what I found interesting, because obviously, Anton's talking about like, oh, how the fact is that even scum, pretending to be something else. Obviously, referencing Mace trying to pretend to be inhuman into human, but also like referencing Ida because the fact is that she is a android and stuff like that. And the fact is when he says that she touches the ring, like I do think that is a mentality that she has. Obviously she does everything that she's programmed to do, but I think it's also because like there is a part of her that wants to be human for whatever reason. Now what we ended up seeing at the end of the episode, obviously the big thing to talk about is the fact is that everyone got separated and everything. Mace got rescued, but then like Gemma was like, figuring things. She's like, okay, things are weird. It's not making any sense. Everyone came back together, but it's like such a short amount of time plus the whole calm situation. And it turns out it's like, oh, apparently the LMD thing was shut down, the scanner that they built to test them. And then she pulls it up and it's like, oh, Coulson's the one who deactivated it. And it's like, oh, why would he do that unless the reason he did that was because he's an LMD, and then it's like, oh, check everything else. And it's like, oh, apparently everyone else is an LMD. Now, I'm not 100% sure if that's them saying that Mace is also an LMD, which I wouldn't be surprised because Ida was there when he was getting the crap beat out of him. So I assume at some point she switched him out for an LMD Mace and let the beatings continue, whatever the case may be. It seems like all of them have been replaced. Daisy, Phil, Mace, and Mac. It didn't come up. I think Fitz too, because Fitz was on his own too during that whole situation. Obviously, she's like, oh, she's thinking like, oh, me and Fitz are the only ones, but it's like, no, I legitimately think it might be Fitz too. I might turn out to be wrong, but I think Fitz because, Radcliffe has a special attachment to Fitz, so he probably want him. I mean, I would assume Ida kind of does too. So obviously, I feel like Fitz would be the best person to take because if you kind of remove him from the equation, the other LMDs are less likely to be figured out. Plus, if it's just Simmons, at least that would be like, oh well. At the very least, Simmons will be reluctant to obviously because she'll look at this situation and not realize because she'll kind of have blinders on when it comes to Fitz, so she won't see him being an LMD. It does make me wonder: are they going to be like May when it comes to being an LMD? Do they know everything ahead of time? I mean, with the whole situation with Phil waking up, LMD Phil waking up LMD May, it seems like there might be something there. But it might also be like that was part of his programming and he did it. But it's like maybe they don't 100% know exactly what they're doing. They're kind of like LMD May until not realizing that they are LMDs until the moment's too late. Maybe like, Phil will come up with some excuse to be like, oh no, we need to bring LMD May online because it's like, maybe should be our best chance to find the real me or something like that. Some excuse like that. It's going to be interesting because it's like, because the way Ida talks about it, because Anton is dead because of the fight with Daisy, which I was actually surprised he died from that. I don't know that Daisy would kill him. So not unless it's a situation where it's like the real Daisy just knocked him out, but Ida, when she came and got Daisy, the real Daisy, ended up killing him in that moment. And now it's parading over his body as like, oh yeah, every scum, basically being like, oh, Anton played his part. Because even the way he makes it seem like, oh, because, Radcliffe went out of his way, like, oh yeah, follow Ida and everything. So that does beg the question that maybe, just maybe, obviously he was a part of a plan, because never, like, Radcliffe never cared about what they wanted. At the end of the day, all he cared about was getting what he wanted. He kind of has that now. But it's a situation where it's like, now you're wondering, is it a situation where Ida is kind of going out of his control because Ida is kind of acting on her own? Or is this all part of Radcliffe's plan? Like I said, it seems like all Radcliffe wanted was this. So It's hard to say because I think maybe reading the Darkhold had a much bigger effect on Ida than maybe even Radcliffe or anyone else thought. We would just kind of have to wait and see on that. But it seems like a situation where I really want to know that more so than anything. Is this Ida's plan or is this Radcliffe's plan? Because if it is Radcliffe's plan, then what's the point? He has the Darkhold. What other need would he have to spy on Shield? Because he's got what he wanted at the end. I mean, not unless it's part of his greater plan. Maybe his plan is to slowly replace a lot of people with LMDs. I don't know. We don't really 100% know his grand scheme. And he got to create the framework and have the lady that he's obviously in love with give her a place to be away from her sick body and everything. But still, I don't know. And another thing that kind of got presented in this episode, it was a very interesting thing, was Mac's reaction being like, yo, Fitz, you need to be more careful with the stuff you build, because it's like, because even Fitz like, are you trying to blame me? Because Mac is basically like, oh, we wouldn't be having so much trouble this year if it wasn't for you, because it's like Fitz kind of helped, with the Ida situation as well as the framework, which the Ida situation, to be fair, Radcliffe had already started heavily in the development of Ida before even Fitz was part of it. Fitz probably helped with some of the technology and kind of worked out some of the kinks, but more so than anything, like, majority of the work was already done by Radcliffe. So there, but then there's the whole framework situation too, and it's like, the point is, like, it was just a conversation of, like, the fact is, you need to think before you build something, the applications it could be used for. It's like, obviously, he's like, I know you're not a bad guy, but the line between scientist and mad scientist is very thin. That basically it's easy to sway over to that side. You take someone like Radcliffe, for example. It doesn't take much for you to kind of end up losing your way and kind of getting swept up in things. And it's like, that does seem like it could be a potential danger for Fitz. But, Simmons talks to him and it's like, the fact is, yes, Mac was right about that part. But the fact of the matter is, that Radcliffe used your inventions and stuff like that for bad doesn't mean you should blame yourself, because that was all him. The fact is, you built all this from the best of intention. Framework, obviously, for the purposes of training, and Ida for the purposes of being a shield, kind of Radcliffe's original reason for building her, which kind of, since I am talking about that point, that's what I was thinking was happening when Ida looked in on Mace and Mace was looking up at her. I was thinking maybe that was her, like, because she was like, oh, I don't have an opinion. Like, I don't, have a problem, with the way Anton was handling things, like going things about his way. It's like, all she does is observe humans. It's like Anton handles things a very different way. So that's what she finds interesting. But part of me was thinking, like, oh, that shield programming of, like, being a shield for people, that was going to kind of go in effect, and she would end up rescuing Mace, and then that turned into a whole thing. But it's like, no, she didn't. Or maybe in her own way she did rescue him, because it's like, well, even though they've been replaced by LMDs, they were saved. I can only assume that maybe this might mean that they're going to be trapped in her framework now too, like May. So it's going to be interesting to see, like, what worlds were built for them. Like I said, I brought it up before, I still wholeheartedly believe that Fitz is one of them. He's an LMD too. Because I was literally in the back of my mind, I was like, Simmons, get away from him. Because like, he's behind her and everything. It's like, I halfway expect him to choke her or stab her or something. I was like, expecting him to do something, but he didn't. I was like, oh, good. But then, like I said, because she lost comms with everyone else, it's like, we know it's not Gemma because she was with that dude. So she was never alone. Everyone else was alone. So it's like, at any point in time, they could have gotten replaced. So things are just definitely going to get very interesting next episode when we see how this all plays out, what this whole plan is for replacing people within S.H.I.E.L.D. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.